Joining me now is one of the members of Congress who will draft and vote on articles of impeachment against the president, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's a member of both the House Judiciary and Oversight committees. First, let's start with this scope question in light of all this evidence. I mean, Lev Parnas has said through his lawyer publicly he wants to cooperate. Apparently, he's turned over various evidence. There's new reporting every day. There's pages of documents inside the White House about their review. What is your thought on the balance between speed in all of this and getting everything you can possibly get?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Chris. And I want to say that we're obviously interested in all relevant testimony from all material witnesses. And Chairman Schiff said that the job is not necessarily over as more evidence comes in. I think that the Oversight Committee feels the same way and the Judiciary Committee feels the same way. On the other hand, we are in the midst of an impeachment investigation against the President of the United States. And so what we have to look at is the table of evidence that is facing us with respect to the President's misconduct in office. And we've seen overwhelming and uncontradicted evidence that the president organized this shakedown of the Ukrainian president in order to obtain statements he wanted from him about investigations that he would produce against Joe Biden. And he also wanted confirmation of the discredited 2016 conspiracy theory, basically trading the Russian intervention for a mythical Ukrainian intervention. So we definitely need to get all the evidence we can related to that. But a lot of the things that you were mentioning goes to other crimes and other offenses against the United States. And, you know, Parnas and Fruman have already been indicted for federal campaign finance violations. And yes, it looks there's a broadening investigation into money laundering, representing foreign governments without registering, funneling foreign money into our elections, and so on. We're interested in that right now to the extent that it implicates the president. And if it doesn't, then I think that will have to be dealt with in other criminal investigations or later on by us.
I guess the question is, how do you find that out, right? I mean, one of the things that's happened is we had weeks of depositions and then followed by public hearings. And in defiance of word from the White House, people came and testified, and some people turned over documents. But the White House is still holding on to documents. It does seem like they're stonewalling on many fronts. And so how would you establish essentially the parameters of the needed facts? Or do you feel like, look, we have him on this. We don't really need any more evidence?
Well, the Intelligence Committee is preparing a report, as Chairman Schiff said earlier today, that we will get upon our return to Congress from the Thanksgiving break. At that point, we will see exactly how they have delineated the contours of the case. And we will have a sense from them whether they think there are still any places where evidence needs to be obtained, or whether they think there is sufficient and compelling evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors at this point. What's fascinating about the hearings that took place was that the story that emerged was uncontradicted. I mean, there was basically no rival factual hypothesis about what happened. And the only people throwing stones at the investigation are people who are refusing to testify in the investigation and refusing to go under oath.
Final question. Don McGahn has been ordered by a federal district judge that he doesn't have absolute immunity. He does have to testify. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, it's got to happen. I mean, Judge Jackson wrote a really comprehensive and decisive opinion saying that they've got to cut out all the nonsense about absolute immunity and categorical executive immunity and all of these totally cooked up, phony doctrines. Everybody owes the sovereign of the United States, the people of the United States, through their representatives in Congress, honest and truthful testimony when called to testify. And unless you've got a real privilege against testifying, like the Fifth Amendment, forget it. And this absolute immunity stuff has got to go. We've won every case on this, and the administration should stop invoking it and instead should send people to come in and give us their testimony.
All right, Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you so much.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.